really a priority in Africa.
The week started with a meeting hosted by the federal government on how countries can engage with the private sector to support nationally determined contribution implementation, including exploring alternative sources of funding such as green bonds, as well as the experience of Nigeria in securing climate finance. The Nationally Determined Contribution, or the NDCs, are the country's national climate plans. Experts believe much needs to be done to link these national climate plans into national development plans and national budgets and factor them alongside national-level responses to the Sustainable Development Goals, the first goal being to eradicate extreme poverty.
What we see as a common issue in all countries is the need to strengthen and to develop, in some cases, the institutional setup for the MRV system.
When it comes to climate action, measuring countries' emissions and the progress they make toward reducing them is critical for evaluating whether the world is on track to limit temperature rise to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. Measuring, reporting and verification of emissions and emissions reductions is necessary to ensure that efforts to combat climate change are paying off. Since 195 countries adopted the Paris Agreement in December 2015, many countries are starting to implement their climate commitments, but many developing countries lack the tools to measure, report and verify progress on their climate commitments and actions. So on the 14th of November, the first day of the second week of Pt.2, the Nigerian government hosted the event that examines how the NDCs can be implemented with the private sector engagement and how measurement, reporting and verification can be achieved.
When we come to talk about the MRV, let's underscore the importance of helping countries with not very strong institutions and capacities, how they do this, aligning both the ambition of the climate agreement, but also with the SDGs. There is layers and layers and layers of different demands from countries, and we need to, I think, come back and step back a bit. What are the baseline data that we need for this? How do we strengthen the institutions for that? What measures and indicators are being worked out in the UN in different corridors, and that we have some alignment across the UN, across the EU, the AU. I think we are getting burdened by the reporting that we are seeing. So when we come to capacity building, we need to be capacity building for coherence.
The reality of integrating climate change into national priorities of economic growth, employment and poverty reduction, alongside the normal challenges of security, political cycles and other events, is now the challenge.
Data across sectors and regions is a challenge. Lack of QA/QC is also among the challenges we have. And one critical challenge is institutional memory. Like when the first national communication was done, it was in 2001. The focal point was National Meteorology Agency. And after that, the second national communication was done under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Imagine, it was done using consultants, using fly-in, fly-out process. So there was no institutional memory which has been moved from one sector to the other.
Nigeria, Egypt and Ethiopia are some of the African countries that shared their plans during the conference in Marrakesh. The countries also discussed their preparation for measurement, reporting and verification requirements under the Paris Agreement and the lessons learned.
To develop MRV system in Egypt. National Council of Climate Change established by Prime Minister Decree to overseeing policies in climate change area, through formulation and updating of comprehensive national climate change strategy and set the national climate change plans and linking them with the national strategy for sustainable development. Also, tackle the challenges regarding the collection, management and processing of climate change data to be presented to decision taker in the transparent manner.
From our experience in the preparation of the first and second national communications, we are now involving consultancies, but using institutions that have track record and international best practices in developing national communications.
The Paris Agreement has set the world on course for transformative climate action to cut emissions, promote clean energy, build climate resilience, and catalyze climate action investments. The agreement's backbone is transparency and accountability on the steps countries are taking toward these goals. This transparency is vital for building international trust and confidence that action is taking place, as well as for assessing how to facilitate further action.
The deforestation happening in the country right now is at a rate that is unsustainable. It's like Nigeria's head is being shaved. We're losing over 1 million trees a day. A lot of that is logging and export, but much of it is also fuel wood. So how can we bring together the reforms in the gas sector, the use of LPG, in urban centers at least, and then eventually in rural areas? How do we do what, in fact, the Senate President had a lot to do with on the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves? How do we bring that in as an alternative as well? So I think it's really just looking to see what the NDC needs to support some of the climate action that we need. We're also going to need their support on the financing side. Domestic resources will, in the end, move the agenda, but we need not just hundreds of millions. We need trillions of dollars globally to really move the needle on climate action. And so that also will need a framework that helps us go out to the international markets. We will be looking at the green bond in next year, which is a sovereign one. But internationally, we're going to need support, and for that, also the legislators.
The commitment to raise $100 billion per year by 2020 is an opportunity to make Africa more resilient to the effect of climate change. African negotiators will need to encourage developed countries to increase their financial support for adaptation before 2020 and better meet the pressing needs of vulnerable African countries. At the same time, the proliferation of funds to tackle climate change has raised questions over African countries' ability to gain access to funds. Funding to adapt agriculture to climate change may be one of the most important issues on the table in Marrakesh. Africa needs direct access to all new funds with minimal management by intermediaries. Given its small responsibility in global warming, the issue of adaptation remains the continent's #1 priority. The effects of global warming are tangible and could have devastating consequences for Africa. In some countries, yields from rain-fed agriculture could be reduced by up to 50% by 2020. By 2020, between 75 million and 250 million people in Africa could be exposed to increased water stress due to climate change, while the continent's arid and semi-arid land could expand by up to 8% by 2080. While Africa welcomed the Paris Agreement as a critical step forward, only the most rigid implementation is likely to help the continent stave off the worst effects of climate change.
Which we want to get the global pension funds, the global private equity funds, and all the sovereign wealth funds, and including the African similar funds in Africa, to come together around concrete infrastructure projects. We structure them, how we are going to finance them, how we are going to de-risk them, and how we are going to remove the legal, regulatory, and political barriers sometimes to this investment coming to pass. So we're on a fast track as far as Africa's development is concerned.
With adaptation costs estimated to be at least 5 to 10% of the continent's GDP, Africa is continuing to push for additional support from the richest nations. Increased technology transfers and capacity building are also seen as essential if Africa is to afford the costs of adaptation. The Conference of Parties on African Soil is a unique opportunity to highlight Africa's needs and build on the strengths. It is a chance to act now to shape models for the continent's future growth. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you for being a part of it. Should you have any comments or questions, our inbox earthfile@channelstv.com is always available. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the crew here in Marrakesh, it's bye for now.